Tim.
I'm Corinne.
It's time to get our asses to Mars as we take a relaxing vacation complete with mutants, machine guns, and a dubious grasp of atmospheric science. Let's take some time to remember Total Recall.
How would you know if someone stole your mind?
We can't let him run around. He knows too much. They've got your bug. I got a lock. There! The bug's in your skull.
Welcome to Mars.
You got a lot of nerve showing your face around here.
Look who's talking.
They erased your identity and implanted a new one.
If I'm not me, who the hell am I?
I want Quaid delivered alive for reimplantation.
That's for making me come to Mars. You wouldn't hurt me. After all, we're married.
Consider that a divorce.
We hope you enjoyed the ride.
Happily married construction worker Douglas Quaid is haunted by dreams of Mars and a mysterious woman. He impulsively decides to take a mental vacation from Recall, a company that can implant instant memories of a restful trip. But his procedure triggers buried memories of another life on Mars, and Quaid discovers his whole existence, including his marriage, has been an illusion designed to hide his true identity. Escaping to Mars, he is caught up between factions of a looming civil war and must find out who he really is and what he knows if he is to survive.
It's a very surface level reading of the entire movie.
Well, given the nature of this movie, I wanted to stay surface level. That brings me to talk about this movie in detail. We're going to have to get into a whole lot of spoilers, so it's highly recommended that you see this movie before listening to the rest of the episode. Okay, so why don't we talk about our first experiences with this movie?
I think, given the timeline, I would have seen this with my cousins. But it's become one of those films that I really don't know when I saw it the first time. I've just always known it.
I remember it came out in 1990. It was a really big, crowded summer with Gremlins 2 and Back to the Future 3, which are the two I was really interested in that year. And I actually missed it on its theatrical run. I didn't catch up until video. And this being a time before the internet, I actually wasn't spoiled about what happens in it. So the movie actually did come as a complete surprise to me.
Oh, days
neat.
of yore.
I know. Back before, oh, by the way, this is the ending of the movie before it's even cast.
Spoiler alert!
But yeah, I really enjoyed it the first time seeing it. And subsequent viewings have revealed some of the flaws, as we'll get into, but
It still holds up pretty well.
I think so.
If you can gently watch it.
A little basic info on the movie. It was released June 1st. It opened against A Cry in the Wild and Frankenhooker, of all things.
Awesome.
And opened number one in the box office over Back to the Future 3, Bird on a Wire, and Pretty Woman. It was filmed on a budget of $60 million and grossed $260 million. And is based on the Philip K. Dick short story, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail later. Let's talk about the cast and characters. First of all, of course, is the literal big man, Arnold Schwarzenegger, as Douglas Quaid.
He does okay. I feel like he does a serviceable job in just about every film he's in, but I've never seen him be spectacular in anything. Schwarzenegger plays this role like it's the last role he's ever going to have in a film career. I mean, he plays everything huge. If he's going to scream, he's going to contort his whole face. If he's going to run down a whole bunch of Martian government people, he's going to do it with his arms spread open wide, swinging back and forth. It's kind of a parody of these types of films, the way he's acting it. I'm not slamming him because it works for this film. It works really well, especially because of the background they've given the Douglas Quaid character versus his background in the short story, which we'll talk about later. But he had to be that big of an actor, like not just a big person or a big star, but a very broad actor for it to work.
I mean, the part, as you mentioned, the short story, it's written for somebody who's kind of a more of a bureaucratic, almost accountant type.
A peon.
Yeah. And when Schwarzenegger became involved in the project, he urged the writers to kind of change it to fit his physicality better. Now he becomes a construction worker instead. And the problem, and I had this with some of Schwarzenegger's parts, is that I can't accept him in an everyman role. And that is kind of how he starts in this movie. He is supposed to be this very average, regular guy who finds out he has much more going on that he didn't even realize. And let's face it, I mean, Schwarzenegger, you look at him, he does not look like the everyman at all.
He's absolutely not believable as the everyman, and I think his physicality sets us up for what kind of film this is going to be. I didn't necessarily need to think of Quaid as an everyman, especially the further you get into the plot, you realize... Well, you don't really realize anything because everything's up in the air. But one of the things up in the air is that he's the spy, and he's got this completely different life that is buried inside his subconscious. And he was not an everyman if you're going to take the movie that way. He would have had some kind of strength and skill. So he just really didn't know it anymore.
One of the points Schwarzenegger made when they were writing it is he liked the idea that you have this big, giant, muscular guy who's now facing a crisis that has nothing to do really with physical strength, but his mind. The fact that his weakness in this movie is the fact that he can't remember who he is, that all this stuff has been taken away, so it's more of an intellectual problem being faced by a big, strapping, muscular guy.
I don't believe that. I think that is truly what Arnold Schwarzenegger believes about his role in the movie, but that's really not what happens at all. All of the work, all of the brain work is put on the viewer, and that's fine. That's fine. But the character really doesn't have a lot to... I mean, he attempts to wrap his head around some of it, like, oh, there's this screen and I'm talking to myself, but I'm acting like I'm a completely different person and I don't know what's going on.
Howdy, stranger. This is Hauser. If things have gone wrong, I'm talking to myself and you've got a wet towel wrapped around your head. Now, whatever your name is, get ready for the big surprise. You are not you. You're me. No shit.
But really, he is just flailing his arms and beating things up.
Which is what he does. Yeah, he solves most problems by either shooting them or using his strength to rip out of them.
Yeah, there's no mental challenge for him to overcome.
During the movie's various permutations over the years as they were developing it, some of the actors that were originally intended for the part were Richard Dreyfuss, William Hurt, and Patrick Swayze.
I would have loved to see William Hurt in this movie.
It would have been a very different film, but yeah, I think it would have been, again, a much more intellectual film. Dino De Laurentiis had the rights at that time, and Schwarzenegger actually actively pursued the role. He saw the script and really wanted to do it, and De Laurentiis turned him down. He just didn't feel it was right for him. Once the movie was put in turnaround, Schwarzenegger actually convinced Carolco Pictures, who later would do Terminator 2, to purchase the rights to the script as a project for him, and had it a little bit more tailor-made for him. He actually had a lot of control over the production. He was the one who recommended getting Paul Verhoeven in to direct it because he was a big fan of RoboCop. He actually worked a lot in terms of the marketing. It turned out the film didn't really have a lot of audience awareness. He convinced them to put more money into the marketing and actually urged them to recut the trailer because apparently the first trailer didn't represent the movie at all the right way.
I'm glad he cared, because then you and I probably would not have seen it as early as we did.
He was very big on quality control. I mean, when there's no more money for special effects, he would no, find the money. We need this special effect. We need this to look right. So I do think he's responsible for a lot of how well the movie holds up in that regard.
Yeah.
You can actually see Schwarzenegger's influence on the production, the fact that all the female characters keep flirting with him and giving him this look of hey!
The doctor...
The secretary,
all of...
Thumbelina.
Yeah.
It's hey, this is the future governor. Right?
Every female character. It made me very uncomfortable.
Getting back to his performance, there are a couple things he does. I like how he sprinkles little hints about the truth we will later find out about Hauser throughout the movie. The callous way he grabs this guy who's been shot and uses him as a human shield during that shootout on the escalator there. Just how incredibly brutal he is during the fight scenes, which for his character is more reflex than anything. The first big fight he has is with a guy he thinks is his friend, who he immediately snaps the neck of without even thinking. That fight scene could easily be played in a way that he looks more confused and he's not sure what's going on, but once it starts, he kind of just snaps into killer mode instantly.
I can see that.
And we have to mention, this role is kind of the real beginning of the patented Schwarzenegger pain and anguish noise.
The one that we decided he would have made a very good Chewbacca.
I've noticed over the years that certain actors have certain noises you hear when they're either in pain or struggling in a role, and that's his, and boy, he does a lot of it in this movie. Next we come to Rachel Ticotin as Melina. Ticotin got her breakthrough role in Fort Apache the Bronx, and also appeared in Falling Down with Robert Duvall, and played Michelle Rodriguez's mother in 2 episodes of Lost. As for her character in this movie, there's not a huge amount to really distinguish her. I mean, she's relatively a strong character. There's actually several scenes where she saves Quaid from danger, which I'm quite appreciative of, but she doesn't feel very well defined.
She isn't well defined at all. She does have some really wonderful moments as a female character, and I hate to say this, but if you take a couple of those away, I think there are 3 moments I can think of, she's a lamp.
I do like that early in the film, she actually does suspect that he's not who he says he is.
I'm sick of you and your goddamn lies.
Why would I lie to you?
Because you're still working for Cohagen.
Don't be ridiculous.
You never loved me, Hauser. You just used me to get inside.
Inside what?
But we've got the immediate hooker with a heart of gold trope. I mean, you saw the brothel they were in. She's like by far the most average looking person there. Average as in not a mutant, not a little person, not a really gross looking dude. Just a regular, very attractive woman. So there's a lot of playing up to standards that comes with her character.
Goes to the question of whether this is real or not, or if she is just a complete fantasy in his mind.
I agree, and that's part of my problem with having a problem with her character, is that part of me, a very large part of me, thinks that he is in some sort of constructed reality, and she is just a very flat, one-dimensional female that he would love to have sex with. This is my type. She's athletic, she's brunette, she's
sleazy and demure.
She's feisty, and that's about it. That's all we really know about her. We don't know anything about how she got to Mars, why she's on Mars, how, if she is at all associated with the Kuatu group. We have no idea.
Yeah, a little backstory would have been nice, but also part of it is for a lot of the movie we're not really supposed to be sure of who she is or whether he can trust her. So next is Ronnie Cox as Cohagen. Cox is known for roles in Deliverance, Beverly Hills Cop, and especially RoboCop, also directed by Paul Verhoeven. Despite his acting skill, the Cohagen character, I thought, comes across as pretty much a stock villain. He's not a very distinctive bad guy.
There were a few moments where he broke out of that role, and at one very, very close to the end of his character's life, he genuinely believed that this alien technology was going to destroy the planet, and there was some real fear there.
What are you afraid of? Turn it on.
Impossible! Once the reaction starts, it'll spread to all the tribinium in the planet. Mars will go into global meltdown. That's why the aliens never turned it on.
Which contradicts what Quaid says. Quaid says that he knows exactly what it is, and his whole motivation for trying to prevent the mutants from getting to it is to keep his stranglehold on the air.
Yeah, and in that last moment before he was so terrified.
Yeah,
you're going to kill us all. He truly believed.
I agree. In that kind of panic, I don't think he'd stick to the lie. I think he actually was really worried this was going to set it off.
But yeah, besides that, he was pretty much bad guy for no reason. In fact, I really still have no idea why Kuatu was such a problem, except he seemed in a way like a political opponent.
That seems to be it. He's mostly just this tyrant who wants complete control over everybody, and Kuato seems to be the only one who would actually stand up to him. But it also brings up another plot hole. If he wanted to prevent Kuato and the mutants from setting this off, why didn't he put an explosive on the thing in the first place? Why does he wait until Quaid's about to get to it to bomb it?
Because then we wouldn't have a movie?
I mean, they could have at least put in a line that it was a last resort, that he wasn't sure what would happen if he bombed it,
yeah,
that it could set it off. That might make a little more sense, but otherwise it's like, why do that? And for that matter, if he suspects that Kuato is in Venusville, why doesn't he just seal that off in the first place and suffocate everybody and get him that way? Or for that matter, seal off and threaten to suffocate everybody if Kuato doesn't turn himself over?
We wouldn't have a movie. And there's really no other way to answer it. he's not a very effective or well-written villain.
You compare it to his role in, say, RoboCop, where he just seems to be this kind of somewhat ruthless executive, and then there's the big shock of, oh my god, no, this guy's a psychopathic criminal. Here, from frame one, from the moment we see him in the newscast, it's like, oh, this is clearly the bad guy. Just look at how the news camera is always zooming in on his face, so he's just menacingly staring at everybody. I mean, there's not even a question about it. Next is Sharon Stone as Laurie Quaid. Before this, Stone had been in Above the Law with Steven Seagal, Police Academy 4, and Action Jackson. This was kind of her big breakthrough role.
Yeah, this was pre-Basic Instinct.
That would actually be the next movie for the same director 2 years later. In fact, it was her performance in this that convinced him to cast her in that one, because he saw that she could play these different sides to a person and be deceptive and nice and friendly the next minute, and all of a sudden, boom, a ruthless killer.
I love you.
Right. That's why you tried to kill me.
No, I'd never do anything to hurt you. I want you to come back to me.
She did a wonderful job. I've never been a huge fan of her acting, but I enjoy her in a certain type of film, and these are those certain types of films. A villainess, basically, but a multi-dimensional villainess.
She plays the role in this very slightly arch quality I think really enhances it.
It works.
There's this tiny bit of artifice to everything she does in the movie, that there's slight kind of almost a condescension toward Quaid in the opening part of it, where at that point we're not sure, is this the real person or is she playing a role for him? And that continues right through, which I really like.
Well, I remember reading that she didn't even know. She had no idea what her truth as her character was, if she was a spy, if she was a dream, she had no idea. So I think it was a good choice to leave her in the dark, because she made some very interesting acting choices.
And a lot of them are silent, like when Quaid leaves for work the first day and she gives this long look after that you're not sure. Is she worried about his attitude? Is she thinking that he might be suspecting something? We're not sure. Or when Richter says he's not coming back, meaning he's going to go kill him, and there's this long look where it's like, is she sorry about this? We're not quite sure what side she's on at that moment. I think that was a really nice choice on her part.
I think we're not sure what side she's on even now, after the movie is over. We can take it at face value, and then we know what side she's on. But if we don't, we still really don't know if she's a dream or if she's a typical nagging wife, which she was in the beginning. The first 20 minutes, her character aggravated the shit out of me. It's like, I don't want to watch the housefrau mentally beating up her husband trope anymore.
Well, considering it's her husband is constantly dreaming of some other woman on Mars, you can understand why she'd be a little annoyed in that situation.
Yes, but it wasn't just that. It was like, oh, Mars, I'm dismissing all of your dreams.
Well, look at it from her point of view. Yeah, let's move to this planet where there's a civil war brewing, and it's oppressive and nasty and no air.
Plus, there was something that she had said, that Mars is dry, dull, and boring. And that just kind of tells me she's been there. She's been to Mars. She knows it's dry, she knows it's dull, and she knows it's boring. If she hadn't been, she might have just said, hey, it's dry and gross and I don't want to go.
She actually ended up getting inducted as an honorary member of the Stuntwoman Association due to her skill performing in the fight scenes.
The fight scenes were amazing.
And I like that we see that she's really proficient. She can actually beat up Arnold Schwarzenegger and make it somewhat believable. Part of that is the fact she just keeps smacking him in the nuts, but...
Right.
Supposedly, one of the people considered for the role was Cynthia Rothrock, the martial arts actress. She claims that she was passed over because her martial arts abilities intimidated some of her potential co-stars. I don't know if that's true, but...
It would be a damn shame if it was true, but...
I think it might have to do with the fact she's really not as talented an actress as Sharon Stone or...
What else has she been in?
Not a lot of big titles, mostly those type of martial arts movies that would play late nights on HBO or so.
Okay.
Brings us to Michael Ironside as Richter. Ironside came to prominence as the villainous telepath Revok in Scanners. I always remembered him as Ham Tyler, the resistance fighter from V, The Final Battle, and V, the TV series.
Yep.
Of course, he also appeared in Top Gun, Highlander 2. He took over for Roy Scheider on Sequest DSV, and he would reunite with Paul Verhoeven for Starship Troopers.
The less said about Starship Troopers, the better.
It strikes me as funny that Richter, to me, is a much more interesting character than Cohagen villain-wise.
He is. I think he is the true villain in this movie. I think Cohagen is like a figurehead. And Richter kind of goes off on his own. You know, he's told by Cohagen to stand back, don't kill him. And Richter is just going to go after him. He's going to murder him, get him off the face of both Earth and keep him off of Mars however he can. And part of his motivation, if we're to take the film at face value, is because Laurie, who is Douglas Quaid's wife, is in reality an agent planted by Cohagen and really involved with Richter. So it's this weird love triangle, and only two of the parties know that there's an issue.
But I like it. As menacing as he is, you sense he really does have a tenderness for her. Like, when he comes in the apartment that first time and she's been knocked out by Quaid, and that other guy comes to help her, he just pushes him out of the way. Don't touch her.
Yeah.
And he all suddenly kneels down. He's very gentle with her.
He does love her. There's some genuine affection there. And I guess you could think that Cohagen is pretty ruthless by putting them both, Richter and Laurie, in that kind of situation of having her undercover with a guy who has no idea who he is.
But I love the insecurity it implies that, I mean, he has this beautiful woman, and yet she's been living with this hulking, huge, muscular guy.
Yes.
It kind of powers his rage through the whole movie. You understand why he's chasing with such vehemence, that he does not want her going back with him at all.
I want that fucker dead.
I don't blame you, man. I wouldn't want a guy like Quaid porking my old lady.
You saying she likes it?
No, I'm sure she hated every minute of it.
And also the fact that you have Michael Ironside. He's a pretty creepy dude, but he's up against Schwarzenegger, who again is just tremendous, and yet Richter still feels like kind of a physical match for him, just because of the sheer rage that he puts into the part.
He does feel like a genuine threat in the way that Cohagen really just doesn't.
Especially, I love that moment where he's chasing him on the subway, and Quaid gets away, and Ironside just lets out this primal scream of frustration. Even his guys kind of back off like, oh, let's give this guy a little room. In the supporting cast, we also have Dean Norris playing Tony, with a face only a mother could love. Of course, Norris is best known for playing Hank Schrader on Breaking Bad, and now he's Big Jim Reddy on Under the Dome. But he's been popping up in movies for years, played a lot of cops, like he was one of the police team in Lethal Weapon 2.
Yes.
He was the head of the SWAT team in Terminator 2. You only see him for a second. I always remember him as the evil head of the shop from The Lawnmower Man, where his face only appears on a screen for the whole film. And he's one of the assassins in The Firm as well. Not very recognizable here under that really heavy makeup.
Not at all. It's a really great makeup job. The character himself, he doesn't do a heck of a lot. He's in the brothel, and he helps Melina and Quaid escape, and that's really about all he does.
Even there, he gets a couple good moments. I like that he, like Melina, is very skeptical of Quaid going in, and yet when the moment comes to hide them, he does it without question. And there's that nice little moment where Quaid's going in, says thank you, just give him this nod like, yep, it's
There's
fine.
also there's a protectiveness in his character over Melina. It doesn't make a lot of sense until you look at it in the same way that the relationship between Nancy and Marv from Sin City works. He's there, he enjoys her company, but he's insanely protective.
But I like that we get hints of that with him and the other members of the Resistance, too. There's a couple moments between him and Debbie Lee Carrington's Thumbelina, the little one there. And
Is that really the character's name?
Yeah, that is her name.
That is awful.
Well, we can assume it's her assumed name for business reasons, but the scene where they're repelling Richter's men out of the bar, the kind of back and forth they have as partners, I like. Little subtle things like that between, sometimes it's just down to looks that he gives George and Thumbelina when Quaid enters, that little, all right, we should be wary of this guy kind of moments. And that brings us to Marshall Bell as George and Quato. Bell had actually appeared alongside Schwarzenegger as the hired killer in Twins just before this. He also popped up as Will Wheaton's, as Mr. Webster, yeah. You know, I don't think anyone's ever seen my face, which kind of applies to this role, too.
Yes.
He also appeared as Will Wheaton's dad in Stand By Me. He was the kinky football coach in Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And he also popped up in Starship Troopers as a general, again for Paul Verhoeven. For his role in this, he had to wear a full body prosthetic for the scene where Quato emerges. And actually, once Quato comes out, they had to make a whole fully animatronic version of him, too, because getting the puppeteers in there to actually make the puppet work, there was just no room for Bell himself to stand. He also provides the voice for Quato, and it's interesting because that really doesn't sound like him at all.
I was going to ask about the voice, because I thought he did sound like the actor, but if you went like this, Oh, it's a lot of, like, pushing a lot of air through your vocal cords and speaking in a pitch that is not your natural pitch.
But it's got this very Zen Dalai Lama quality to it that I like.
And I wanted to know if that actor had done any voiceover work.
I'm not sure, but it wouldn't surprise me. But I really like the character of Quato. For what little we get of him, there's something very appealing about him, even as disgusting as he looks.
I think this movie is a little off balance in that we spend far too much time on Earth and not enough time in Mars, because exactly what you're saying, we don't get to see a lot of George/Quato, and I'm more interested in the underground movement going on Mars than I am about Quaid and whether or not he knows who he is.
I agree. I would like to have seen a lot more development where it started, and
we're told he's leading resistance, but we don't really see the resistance either. We get a little bit of it.
Well, we see guys shooting.
Yeah.
But that's about it. We don't know. We're told later they're fighting for more air, more rights, more freedom, that kind of stuff. But since we get so much of Cohagen kind of stating his position, I'd like to have heard a little bit more of Quato stating his and actually seeing him lead rather than just hearing about him doing it from the shadows.
Yeah, here are all these things I have done.
But he also gets to kind of drop one of the important themes of the movie, this idea of Quaid and the average person in general isn't defined by what they remember or what their memories tell them about themselves, but the choices they make and how they act on them.
What do you want, Mr. Quaid?
The same as you, to remember.
But why?
To be myself again.
You are what you do. A man is defined by his action, not his memory. Please, take my hand. Now, open your mind to me.
But I also like that Quato represents sort of a nice mirror of Quaid, in that you have like two different personalities in the same body, and yet one of them remains hidden. And that he's the one who starts to kind of bring that out of Quaid.
That's a really good point. In a way, Quaid's other self is the foil for Quato. So Hauser is, I don't want to say pure evil, but I'm going to kind of simplify things. Hauser's evil, Quato is good, and they are both the hidden sides of these characters. That's very interesting.
And here we come to my least favorite character in the movie, Mel Johnson Jr. as Benny.
Okay, there are many, many reasons why I don't like Benny.
Yeah.
And it's not the actor, it's the character. It is terrible. It is very... It's a stereotype.
Well, he is a stereotype, definitely, in the way he acts, but there's part of me that gets the idea that's part of his deception, too. Like, as soon as he shoots Quato, listen to how his voice changes instantly, that he's no longer kind of doing that affectation to it, that streetwise, hey kind of guy. It just drops down to this much more sinister thing, at least for that scene. He kind of jumps back into his Benny persona right after that.
But that's the problem, is that that's one scene, that's the exception. His entire role before and after that is just ludicrous. He talks about he's got 5 kids to feed, and the character has gold teeth.
Hey, man, I got 5 kids to feed.
Take him to the dentist.
Hey, thanks, mister. Listen, I'll be waiting here for you. You just take your time. Benny's the name. Benny!
And he mugs for the camera, and these are all writing choices.
I think the bigger problem is that I don't even think he's a very necessary character. For the one thing, in retrospect, it should be obvious that he is what he is concerned. He really doesn't contribute much to the movie at all, other than ferrying people back and forth.
He really has
there's so much emphasis on him, it should be obvious that, okay, this guy is definitely up to something. But I really don't think we need this character at all, and even having him in there, I think, is something of a plot hole. Because you look at it this way. The whole operation, as we find out eventually, is that Quaid has his memory erased so they can get a mole in close to Quato to infiltrate and get him killed. The problem is Quato and his mutants around him are psychic, and therefore they see through anybody they'd send undercover to actually get the job done. And yet, Benny is there and we assume, knows what he's doing, and therefore the psychics should be able to sense him coming.
It's a massive plot hole, and they take him as being not a threat because he reveals that he is also a mutant. That's not much of a reveal when you can look inside somebody's brain.
Think how much more devastating a twist it would have been if once Quato gets into Quaid's mind and unlocks what's there, Quaid snaps and some post-hypnotic suggestion makes him shoot Quato.
Yeah.
What an incredible shock that would have been.
And at that point, it's pure invention. The screenplay is pure invention. So this isn't on the short story from Philip K. Dick. This is on the screenwriters.
And then later on, they have that long, ridiculous fight with the drill machine that it just feels so unnecessary by that point. I mean, it's only in there because we have to have that character killed because he shot Quato.
Not just, I mean, the character does, have to have some retribution, but at the same time, he has that character has no motivation to go chasing after Melina and Quaid at that point. He's done his job, which is to kill Quato once they've found him. He's collected his reward in a sense. He does not need to keep going, and he goes at them in a way that feels and sounds very crazy.
Yeah, which again doesn't fit what we saw in that scene where he assassinates Quato. He comes across as much more of a straight assassin.
Exactly.
He's been putting on a part.
I think that entire scene, if they wanted to do that with the drill, really needed to be done by Richter.
Or it might have even worked if he played it a little bit more toned down and we have a scene of Cohagen telling him, all right, go kill them.
Yes.
Something to get him back in the action in a more logical way. But everything about his character just has come to grate for me. I really feel like the movie would have been better without him in it.
Yeah.
Again, that's not a reflection on the actor. And getting to him, he also appeared as Broca in the final episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine and popped up in The Practice and Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Other than this, though, he hasn't had a huge amount of film roles. So.
I didn't recognize him from anywhere.
In terms of Benny being a bad guy, I like the foreshadowing that the recall salesman mentions. Why worry about stolen luggage, crooked cabbies, that they work in a tiny little bit of foreshadowing there. For a couple quick other members of the supporting cast, we have Lycia Knapp playing the infamous three-breasted prostitute. Biggest thing I remember her on is from a 2-episode stint on Star Trek The Next Generation, where she was in the first Borg episode. Obviously, not much for her to do here, but she's kind of emblazoned herself into the memories of male filmgoers everywhere, and some female filmgoers with that part. There's Roy Brocksmith playing Dr. Edgemar, who doesn't have a huge part, but has one really great scene where he comes in to try and apparently fool Quaid into coming back to reality, where it's still not sure whether what he's saying is true or not. You might have recognized him from several Tales from the Crypt episodes he was in, and again on Star Trek The Next Generation as the Zach Doran strategist Cole Rami. I love the kind of assuredness he gives into it, that he just walks in this room and tells this guy,
I'm afraid you're not really standing here right now.
Doug, you could have fooled me.
I'm quite serious. You're not here, and neither am I.
That's amazing. Where are we?
At Recall. You're strapped into an implant chair, and I'm monitoring you from the psychoprobe console.
I get it. I'm dreaming. And all this is part of the delightful vacation your company has sold me.
Not exactly. What you're experiencing is a freeform delusion based on our memory tapes, but you're inventing it yourself as you go along.
And lays out this whole elaborate scenario where Quaid is actually hallucinating everything and going on a psychotic bender, and almost manages to sell it to the audience, too.
I bought it as a kid. I bought fully that one drip of sweat gave him away. However, I play devil's advocate. If Quaid is kind of filling in all the gaps, if he's got the framework of this scenario and he and his subconscious mind is filling the gaps, his subconscious is absolutely not going to let him believe this is all a dream. And it would have given him some kind of really obvious clue to say, oh, no, this is all real. This is all really happening. And that dream instance would have been a bead of sweat.
Not to mention, if it is a faithful representation of him in the recall office, maybe it's just hot in there.
Can we talk a little about the naming of the characters in Recall? So, Dr. Edgemar, Mar meaning to blemish or alter, and Edge, Edgemar, surgically alter. And Dr. Lull, Dr. Lull, as in asleep or being tired, you're in a lull, things are calm and peaceful. Like when you're on vacation or having your vacation turn into a bunch of agents and Martians killing each other. So those names just scream not real.
And yet, all those names come up before he actually enters the simulation. So, I mean, the first 20 minutes or so of the movie would seem to be real at any rate. At least right up to the point where he sits in that recall chair.
We don't have to believe that, though.
Well, if you're going to say that, then the entire film from beginning to end is a possible hallucination.
Agreed.
I prefer to think that at least the first 20 minutes are real.
It would make a lot more sense story-wise for at least a portion of this movie to be real.
And I don't think we really have anything in the film that would suggest otherwise. I mean, all the different scenarios seem to suggest at least those 20 minutes actually do happen. The last two I want to mention are Robert Picardo as the voice of Johnny Cab, another guy with a Star Trek connection thanks to playing Dr. Zimmerman, the hologram on Star Trek Voyager, and being in tons of Joe Dante movies.
That was him.
Yep.
Okay.
And Debbie Lee Carrington as Thumbelina. I know her best from In Living Color, where she played the Tiny Avenger, Handyman's sidekick. She's also played a whole ton of Ewoks in the Star Wars franchise, and was one of the various people in the duck suit for Howard the Duck.
Oh, Howard the Duck.
For that, she gets a medal just for suffering through that kind of work right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I like that she gets some really good moments in here, too. Like cutting up Helm, Richter's little henchman there, who I found incredibly annoying, quite on purpose throughout the movie. That he's a guy you're waiting for him to get it. And boy, he gets it good from her.
She does. She kicks ass. She is, in my opinion, the one female character who they don't even pull any punches with. They're like, no, this is just our character. She takes care of business. She helps out her friends. She shoots bad guys. She's down for everything. I love this character. Well, I don't love her profession. That's like the one spot, the Achilles heel in the writing of this character is the profession.
Coming to the crew, of course, there's the director, Paul Verhoeven. Among the directors who were originally going to do it were Richard Rush, and this is the heartbreaker for me, David Cronenberg. I really would love to have seen what his take on this movie
would have been a completely different film. And I'd still love to see that film. And in fact, I think we should have gotten that film instead of the Total Recall reboot.
Yeah, I agree. Because, I mean, he's a director who specializes in weird psychological stuff, so it seems like this material would be tailor-made for him. But I do think that Verhoeven definitely gave it his own distinctive stamp.
He did, and that's why I love this film and not the remake. But also would have wanted Cronenberg's version just to compare to, because one is obviously going to be much darker than the other.
Previous to this, of course, Verhoeven was just coming off of RoboCop, a huge, huge hit for him, and that kind of put him more into the science fiction genre than he had been to that point.
And they're both tonally the same in terms of like the color palettes, and we've got a big, strong, hulking type of figure who has one flaw. The one flaw for Quaid being his brain, I guess, and RoboCop being his body.
There's, of course, the gruesome violence of it, too. He really revels in that, especially in this movie. I always forget how bloody it is, how much the camera lingers on people getting shot.
He films it really well, though. Like, there are lots of directors who can't pull off what he manages to pull off in this movie. I mean, using a human as a human shield, it's gruesome to start with, but he has Quaid use it for about 4 minutes.
And then fling it at people.
Yes, and then use it as a weapon. Use the dead body he has used as a shield as a weapon.
Most of his really good movies have a satirical edge to them, certainly in RoboCop and, well, definitely in Starship Troopers. And I think, like that film, there's a lot of kind of fascist overtones to a lot of the stuff we see in this movie. There's the security checkpoints that we see everybody going through with the cool X-ray scanners.
Which is scary because it's kind of sort of happening right now.
Yep. A lot of the costuming, his goon squad wearing the gray outfits.
Yes.
Even Richter in his leather jacket has kind of a Gestapo look to him. Just Cohagen in general has a very Hitler quality to him. There's a lot of very subtle, a lot more subtle here than they would be in Starship Troopers, kind of fascist visual cues to this film.
It goes even to the architecture. The architecture of the buildings they used for Earth seemed very brutalist. It's all cement and hard edges.
For the screenwriters, the script was by Ronald Shusett, Dan O'Bannon, and Gary Goldman. Shusett and O'Bannon actually optioned this story from Philip K. Dick himself initially. They were going to make the movie themselves until they realized it would cost way more than they could afford. So they dropped it and turned to another side project, and that ended up becoming Alien. When Cronenberg was involved, he actually contributed a lot of ideas to the script. He was actually the one responsible for the mutants and the character of Quato.
It was an excellent contribution.
And I think it shows in that after his involvement, a couple years later, he'd do Dead Ringers, and that movie actually had a scene cut out where the Jeremy Irons character hallucinates his twin brother pulling out of his stomach as this parasitic twin. So
wow.
I think it was him kind of trying to recycle that idea in that story as well.
Oh, we all recycled them.
One of the reasons he ended up leaving while he was writing with Shusett and O'Bannon is that he wanted to do something in the tone of the original Dick story, and Shusett kept telling him, no, we're not doing that anymore, we're doing Indiana Jones in space. And, well, they pretty much got there, I'd say.
The tone of the short story had a Twilight Zone feeling to me, where, something happens and this character, he hates his wife is a nag. He goes to recall, has an episode, which, to this point, a lot of the film is faithful enough to the Philip K. Dick story. But the rest of the story takes place in recall. It never leaves recall. And I would have loved that. I understand why they chose not to do it. It's difficult to make a film in one room, but it would have been very, very interesting.
Yeah, again, as more of a psychological thriller, I think that would have been something to see.
Yes, but it would have been a much smaller movie. It would have brought in smaller revenue, so I understand why the studio did not want to take that risk.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they need something to hang on, especially once Schwarzenegger gets involved. There's no way it's going to be a movie about a guy sitting in a chair in a room.
Yeah, they absolutely could not. Arnold Schwarzenegger does not do those types of films.
The original script had a lot more black humor in it as well, I guess, which once Verhoeven came in, he stripped a lot of it out, which angered Dan O'Bannon. He also brought in Gary Goldman, who was one of the screenwriters on Big Trouble in Little China, to kind of collaborate and kind of shape the script into what it finally became for shooting.
This makes so much sense. Big Trouble in Little China being another movie that I adore, but has problems.
It works a little better there, though, because that one does have such a goofy tone.
It does. Yeah, it
those
does.
Kind of issues fit with it. Back when the film was going to be made by Dino De Laurentiis, he tried to convince Shusett to change the ending where Mars gets this oxygen atmosphere, claiming that there's no way they could visualize it. But Shusett stuck to his guns, and thankfully it stayed in the script because it is a kind of key to the movie.
It is their triumph, and it does look beautiful. They did a really good job. It looked very interesting. It would absolutely never happen.
Certainly not that way.
I have to stretch the limits of my imagination to make that one work.
Yeah, terraforming in under 5 minutes for the entire planet.
I know.
A little hard to swallow. The director of photography for the film was Jost Pacano. He also worked with Verhoeven on Soldier of Orange, RoboCop, Showgirls, and Starship Troopers.
That's a resume.
I've noticed, comparing this with RoboCop and Troopers, he tends to favor kind of a soft lighting, low contrast look to the movie. Everything is a little slightly
muted,
washed out and muted. There's a lot of earthy tones and gray tones to it. I think the soft lighting partially is used to kind of play off the reflective surfaces. There's a lot of metallic surfaces everywhere in these movies that he does with Verhoeven. I also noticed that there's very little blue used.
There is very, very little blue.
And I think that's to kind of save it for the end when that atmosphere does hit Mars and we get blue skies to give it a little bit more impact, and that's really one of the few times we see bright.
I made a note of yellow. Every time yellow shows up, you need to pay attention. It does show up in what look like construction alleyway kind of scaffolding, but when it looks like it's being used deliberately, like the sign when he gets to Mars, Quato lives, the graffiti, it's yellow. It's bright yellow. You will never miss it. When Quaid gets to Mars and he is disguised as a woman, that woman is wearing a large yellow caftan, and Melina is wearing a yellow sports bra the first time they meet. I don't know what the connection is with the yellow, except that it happens only on Mars, and it happens only on things we really need to pay attention to.
Interesting, and it seems to be aligned with the quote-unquote good guys, Quato, Molina, Quaid himself.
There were instances where it was like, is that yellow or is that green? What color is that? There were a lot of instances during this movie of, I have no idea what muddy color that is. But yeah, if it's like straight up yellow, it's taking place on Mars, and it is going to be a friendly zone.
Interesting, I never noticed that. Doing the music score for the film, we have Jerry Goldsmith. Again, this guy's a legend. You barely have to even get into his career. Love that whenever he does science fiction movies, he's one of the few composers around that time who wasn't really afraid to get into using electronic instruments and instrumentation in symphonic scores. And it really adds to the futuristic soundscape that the movies have.
I don't know if it would work now as a futuristic sounding score, because we've kind of gotten past synthesizers that way, purely for score. If they were going to use synthesizers now, it would be in a film that is supposed to be dated. Like, oh, this is all taking place in the 80s.
Or the electronic sounds are made to more resemble orchestral stuff, like the way Hans Zimmer uses them in his scores, for example.
Yes, absolutely.
Apparently a lot of people criticize the movie for lacking a main theme. I love the main theme. It's immediately kind of pulls you into it, saying this is going to be big and exciting.
I can't tell you what the main theme is, but when the movie starts and you've got the synthesizer just kind of pounding away like this bass, that's what I think of when I think of Total Recall, that bass sound of the synthesizer.
I think of those low brass notes that apparently Goldsmith was inspired by Basil Polidoris, who did the score for, appropriately enough, Conan and the Barbarian, and just done RoboCop for Paul Verhoeven. And the opening theme has a lot of those low brass notes that his scores often have. Goldsmith apparently considered it one of his best scores, and I agree. It's really catchy. It definitely moves the action along very well. It has a couple quieter, almost ethereal moments, especially in anything involving the alien pyramid and all the alien technology.
It complements the movie, which is the highest praise I can give a movie score. If I notice your music in the movie, I'm not happy. I don't want to notice it because it's supposed to complement the movie. If I'm listening to the movie and not watching it, or if it's a movie I've seen before, then I'll pay attention to those things. And I'll be able to say, oh, well, that was a really good score. But if it's a really bad score, I'm going to notice.
Yeah, his music is involving but never distracting.
Exactly.
A couple notes about the production. A lot of the futuristic-looking architecture we see in the movie, especially during the Earth scenes, wasn't constructed. It was actually found in Mexico City as a lot of their subway system. But while working in Mexico, pretty much the entire film crew got incredibly sick, as often happens there. The poor air quality was causing people to drop left and right, food poisoning. Verhoeven had to have paramedics nearby when he was directing between takes just to keep them going.
Quatu's Revenge.
Quatu's Revenge, yeah. The only exceptions apparently were Ronald Shusett, who took really out there precautions, like only using boiled or bottled water to brush his teeth and getting regular B12 injections, and Schwarzenegger, who just had all of his food catered in from America. So let's talk about the special effects. Once again, watching it, I'm always struck by how good the model work is and how much I miss model work in modern movies. That one single shot of the spaceship touching down on Mars still looks really good.
It does look great. And I do miss model work in a way I didn't know I did until I started realizing what was a model and what wasn't a model. Modern movies, I've found, has a very strange look when it's all computer generated. It's very realistic. Some of them are fantastic, but I still can't believe they have weight.
That's exactly the word I was going to use, weight, yeah.
And with a model, even though it's completely scaled down, it has a physical presence. It has a three-dimensional presence. So its weight isn't even in question.
Yeah, the interior workings of the pyramid, when we see them working in the finale, it just has this mass to it that it feels gigantic.
Yeah.
The only real CGI used in the movie was for the X-ray screen, which is a great moment.
From what I read, the program to animate that section didn't work correctly, and they had to do it by hand.
In which case, it's an even better job, because the human motion in it does seem very natural and realistic.
It's great, yeah.
Especially watching the scene where Schwarzenegger's going by with other actors, and you can see one character that's clearly Schwarzenegger's walk, and the other characters, it matches perfectly how each one moves, and right down to the dog being taken through it.
At that point, did they have motion capture?
They had a very primitive version of it, certainly not where it is today. Also, in terms of the special effects, we have the makeup effects by Rob Bottin.
Incredible makeup effects, bulging eyes, bleeding faces, distortions. I mean, all of the human exposure to the atmosphere or lack of atmosphere. I mean, even the tongues, you could see them swelling. Is just really wonderful work. A little outlandish and not possible whatsoever, but horrific, and it just a feat.
And fits the tone of the movie in that exaggerated, not quite real quality that it has.
Yes.
But also you have all of the mutants in Venusville.
Yes.
Those makeups still hold up very well. Quato himself, I love the look of him. He looks kind of like a melted version of Chucky that's born out of somebody's stomach.
And one of the most successful special effects came from Benny, of all characters. The character I did not like at all. When he unfolds his mutant arm, it is so graceful. I believe that is a real limb.
The way the fingers separate and bend and stretch.
And then fold back under and in, and the other hand goes back on to make it look like he has two human hands. It's very, very well done, very elegant.
Or the breakdown of Quaid's disguise, played by Priscilla Lane. The wig comes off and that giant chunk comes out of the side of her head, and then it just splits right down the middle.
I think that's one of the more prominent effects, and it was really well done, but it's still not my favorite.
I also noticed there's a whole lot of puppet Schwarzenegger heads in this movie. At least three. You have the one that explodes out in the atmosphere, the one that's under the fake Priscilla Lane head because they couldn't actually fit Schwarzenegger under there, and the one where he pulls the bug out of his nose.
Oh, God. That was the worst.
And that one was apparently so realistic that there were kids somewhere on the set when they were filming that, and they were like, oh, we just wanted to meet Schwarzenegger over there, not realizing it was actually a puppet head.
The tracking device taken out of his nose, on the other hand, could never happen.
Not without destroying his nasal cavity and causing him to bleed to death, yeah. I sometimes wonder if the puppet effects work so well because Schwarzenegger himself, his facial contortions are so kind of exaggerated and weird that it helps them fit.
They complement each other. They absolutely do. And this is one of those moments where I'm like, well, I guess Schwarzenegger, in this film, the way they have this film done, I think he may have been one of the only actors who could have pulled it off. He has the mass. He has the unabashed scenery chewing. He's just great.
He does have a dedication to helping those effects work. I remember reading on Terminator 2 when he saw the puppet version of him walking, and the walk was a little awkward. He actually changed his walk in the scene before to make it match. He's kind of known for doing things in his performance to aid the special effects and bridge the gap between the two of them. Okay, let's get into the really heavy stuff, some of the themes of the movie. The big question is, for you watching the movie, which level of reality do you think is happening? Because we have a couple of different options. We have the option that Quaid is actually just experiencing the recall vacation that he paid for, and everything we see is part of that. We see the possibility that, as Edgemar suggests, he's having some kind of schizoid embolism during the recall procedure, and everything is this psychotic hallucination, or that it actually is really happening. Which one, when you watch the movie, do you kind of subscribe to?
When I was a kid, I believed that everything was real. I would have been probably 12 when I saw it. I wasn't really into looking at subtext. Now, I believe it was a recall mishap. I don't necessarily believe it in the same way that everybody else does, but it's possible, and this is really going out there, it's possible that he was given the injections and that he himself had some mental issues causing what they call a schizoid embolism, which is absolutely not something that can happen. Don't look it up on WebMD. It doesn't exist. You are never going to have a schizoid embolism. And then, what had been implanted was the framework of Mars and the woman that he was going to see, but they didn't implant the spy stuff. However, this has been such a dream for him. This has been his one desire, to be a spy, to save the world, and he filled in the blanks.
Kind of backing that up is the fact that everything Dr. Edgemar says during his little speech comes true.
The walls of reality will come crashing down. 1 minute, you'll be the savior of the rebel cause, and the next thing you know, you'll be Cohagen's bosom buddy. You'll even have fantasies about alien civilizations, as you requested, but in the end, back on Earth, you'll be lobotomized.
Even that whole thing about the walls of reality come crashing down, a second after he shoots them, the walls blow in and the bad guys storm.
Yeah, and there's also, in the very, very beginning, this last time I saw it, I paid attention to the newsreel that's playing in the back when Quaid is having breakfast, after he has a dream, after he has a very, very realistic dream of Mars and that woman. He gets up, he watches this newsreel, and it has Cohagen, and they talk about Quato and how nobody knows what he looks like, and they talk about Mars politics, and it's like watching a scary movie before you go to bed and then having a bad dream. So, I think that Quaid was given some kind of framework, and he suffered some kind of episode, and then his subconscious filled in all the gaps.
I think viewing it that way, his whole adventure almost becomes this tragic portrait of a guy kind of running away from reality.
Yeah.
He's already verbalized this thing that he wants to be somebody.
Laurie, don't you understand? I feel like I was meant for something more than this. I want to do something with my life. I want to be somebody.
You could almost take it as he's kind of burying himself into this hallucination, because in this hallucination, he is somebody important. He's somebody everybody's chasing after. He's not just this everyman, average construction worker guy.
He had the ultimate vacation. He was confronted with the idea that it might be an implant. He rejects it. It's real. He goes, he saves Mars. He gets the girl. Everything is wonderful. He gets rid of his terrible wife. He gets rid of the coworker that he probably secretly hates. It really is a dream.
Which makes you wonder if that fade to white means he's actually lobotomized at the very end.
Well, you don't know necessarily if he's being lobotomized or if he's waking up. It's definitely not what I would call the end of the movie. Usually the movie ends when it's fading to black. This movie doesn't end as it fades to white. It ends when the credits roll.
To be honest with you, I want to believe the psychosis one, because I find that the most interesting. That, to me, it is tragic and grim and bizarre, and I like the direction it puts the movie after that scene with Dr. Edgemar, that from here on in, he's screwed. That's it. He's blown it. I kind of like that idea. If you do look at his adventure as being the recall vacation he was promised and everything actually worked and all these crazy twists were just part of it, you can almost see it as sort of a metaphor for escapist cinema or literature for that degree. I mean,
or video games.
Or video games, yeah. The idea that whatever media it is, you take a trip where you forget your everyday life and submerge your personality and take on somebody else's, which as he promised in the Ego Trip.
Let me suggest that you take a vacation from yourself. And I know, it sounds wild. It is the latest thing in travel. We call it the Ego Trip.
No, I'm not interested in that.
You're going to love this, Doug. We offer you a choice of alternate identities during your trip. Face it. Why go to Mars as a tourist when you can go as a playboy or a famous jock or...
Secret agent. How much is that?
And that's kind of what you do when you sit down to watch a movie. You sort of bond with that character and kind of take on their experiences for the 2 hours or however long it lasts.
Yes.
And again, we have some hints about this during the recall scene where that technician, when he gets the computer chip, goes, "Oh, isn't that weird? Blue skies on Mars."
Never seen this before.
Yeah. Or that his orientation shows a lot of stuff he's going to be seeing later, like Melina, like the oxygen plant, which, again, if it was all this was actually happening, why would Recall have those images in their database? Why would they be showing this
Exactly.
kind of stuff?
I mean, there's the issue of Melina herself. She shows up looking the way she does in his dream, and then he gets to Recall, and she just happens to be one of the prototype females he can choose. That doesn't make any sense. at all under any theory of this movie.
Well, except for the fact that the only shot we see of her at the recall facility is when he's starting to fall asleep. So there's a question of, is that what's on screen, or is that what he's seeing?
That's a very good
is he
point.
filling in the details of a blank model?
I think you just broke this movie open. I think you just found the exact moment his trip or hallucination or schizoid embolism began.
Considering the reality idea that everything that happens is real, I think it's interesting how it subverts the idea of the I'm special fantasy. Again, he says that, I want to be somebody, and he has this adventure where he's important, everyone's chasing after him, and it turns out this special somebody is a bastard.
Yes, yeah. Don't ask to be somebody important because you might not be a good important person.
And this fake persona that's been created for him is more compassionate, he's a more well-rounded human being, despite the fact he's completely artificial. He's the real, true human being, as opposed to the real guy who's a complete evil asshole.
I didn't want it to end this way. I wanted Hauser back, but no. You had to be Quaid.
I am Quaid.
You're nothing. You're nobody. You're a stupid dream.
As Quado suggests, it's not what you remember, but what you choose to do with the knowledge that you have that defines the person.
What you do is who you are.
One other thing I noticed is that the movie has a lot of scenes that actually take place outside Quaid's point of view.
Yes.
Which, again, makes you question.
Another really big problem with attaching myself to one theory in this movie. Things that should be hidden from our character we're seeing. We're seeing scenes where he is absolutely not in the film. But if I want to think of it in my own theory, in dreams sometimes you head hop. But this would be a really linear dream if he was able to do that. Or there are just things you know.
If it is a psychotic episode, you could argue that everybody in the story is part of him. So when we're seeing Cohagen and Richter bouncing off each other, maybe that's just different parts of Quaid's persona kind of bouncing off each other to maintain this hallucination. I also have to ask, this is something I've noticed the more I've watched the movie, I've actually started to find the action scenes start to get a little tiresome after a while. It just seems like there's so much of Richter and the bad guys chasing Quaid. Everybody gets shot, Quaid escapes. Same thing happens over and over and over again. To the point where I'm more interested in the plot turns than the action scenes.
I agree. The first time I saw this, I remember just loving it, and oh my god, these crazy things are happening. It's not a movie that holds up to repeated viewing, and by repeated viewing, I mean like 20 or 30 times. Because you will get bored, it does get repetitious, and everything else falls apart.
It's strange because, I can watch RoboCop, also Paul Verhoeven, and all the action scenes there I still find thrilling, maybe because they all just feel a little bit more unique and different each time.
These chase scenes don't have much of a purpose. The only fight scene that has some sort of a purpose is in the airport. And even in the airport, there are issues.
Well, I'd argue the first one where he kills his supposed buddy from
that
work,
as well, yeah.
It's a good character building moment to indicate, all right, this guy's more than he seems. And I do like the first subway chase mostly for that moment of Richter chasing after him on the subway, just annihilating the whole subway car. But after a while, a lot of it it gets repetitious.
Yeah.
And it feels like the movie is now using the plot to justify these action scenes rather than the reverse. The action scenes powering the plot. All right, let's get into some trivia. One of the things I love this one. During his recall orientation, the doctor there starts showing him pictures of aliens and alien artifacts. If you freeze frame in there, you can see a really brief shot of an illustration of a green Martian from Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barson books, one of the Michael Whalen covers from that. So a tiny little bit of Tars Tarkas in the movie. That makes me smile. During Benny's drill attack, there's a moment where you see a large piece of rock suddenly drop down and hit Rachel Ticotin in the head. And apparently it was a clay wall, but it was a really heavy piece, and it really hit her and kind of knocked her for a loop. And as soon as they saw it, Verhoeven and all the crew went, oh yeah, we have to use that. It's too good.
The character did not act like she had a head wound. The actress managed very well to not show how much that hurt, because I thought it was foam. When I saw it, I laughed. I thought it was foam. Now, knowing it was heavy and actually hurt her, that makes me really sad.
Yeah. The production was so secret that a lot of times the names of the sets had to be concealed from crew members during production. The movie had some big problems with the MPA and had to be trimmed to get an R rating, notably the scene with the human shield. Believe it or not, that actually had to be cut down. We're not seeing all of that.
The human shield scene lasted like 4 minutes.
I'm not sure how much more you could cut from that, yeah.
Or how many more bullets this dead body can hold.
Also, the death of Helmet, Thumbelina's hand, the scene where she stabs him, originally was a lot longer, where she kind of basically gutted him from crotch to chest, just sliced the knife right up, but again, had to be cut down. The main character's name was changed from Quail in the original story to Quaid, probably because the vice president at the time was still Dan Quayle, and, well, you really didn't want a distraction like that going through the entire movie.
Absolutely not.
A man who has no mind running around Mars, and his name is Quail.
It's a little too close to home.
The scenes where the Venusville citizens are all asphyxiating was originally shot with the actors kind of violently gasping and writhing around.
Which is probably more what would happen if the air had been sucked out.
I guess when they viewed it back, it came across as a little too comedic. And Joss Pocano, the DP, suggested they just kind of lie down and kind of languidly suffocate, which works a lot better, I think.
It does.
Let's talk a little bit about the costuming and how 1980s it is.
I know this film was released in 1990, and by then we'd gotten into a lot of spandex and big t-shirts, but this movie is totally 80s when it comes to the costume. We're talking about huge shoulder pads that have angles and necklaces that are just these big chunky things, earrings that
crazy earrings.
Earrings that are very, very long that not only brush your shoulders but go past your shoulders and are gigantic.
The textures and patterns on the suits, lots of stripes and dots and stuff. And the colors that kind of, again, match the visual palette. A lot of grays and tans and maroons, kind of drab colors.
There are leg warmers on more than one occasion.
Yep, a lot of them in the Last Resort Club.
Yes. Leg warmers paired with high heels and spandex.
Ooh.
And flash dance off the shoulder shirts.
Yep.
Yes, there's a lot of 80s.
And a lot of big hair.
And a lot of neon. Not just talking about the costume, but the scenery. A lot of neon lights in neon colors, one would say.
All right, let's talk about something somewhat unpleasant. Animal safety on the productions didn't seem to be a heavy priority in a couple of those scenes. During that scene where Richter tracks Quaid to that cement factory, a lot of those explosions are going off really close to those rats.
Yeah, you can see the rats reacting to it. It made me very sad. It was very distracting as an adult viewer. There was no mention at the end of the film if there were, the disclaimer, there were no animals harmed in the making of this film. And I don't even know if it existed at that point, the animal welfare stuff.
Or the note about, any scenes depicting harm to animals have been simulated.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have the moment with the goldfish, which even as a kid, that disturbed the heck out of me.
I think that this goldfish scene happened around the same time that song Faith No More came out with in the video, and at the very end there's a gasping goldfish on the ground, and there was a great outcry about the welfare of that goldfish. And even as a kid, I was like, I don't quite understand why it's a big deal, but I'm still very uncomfortable about this. And that's just that video. Seeing it in Total Recall when I was a kid, it didn't matter. It's just like, okay, great, but a bunch of fish.
Now, they've cracked down at it now. I mean, you can't even kill a worm when you're filming a movie at this point.
Which is fantastic.
I'm fine with that.
I would rather it all be fake.
Shall we jump into the legacy of the movie?
Yes.
Okay, well, the big one is that this movie kind of opened the door for other films that play around with the concept of memory and reality. The Matrix being probably one of the biggest ones right there.
Yes.
I'd say even Inception. Yep.
Memento. And they all play with memory and reality in different ways, but they definitely were the brainchild of Philip K. Dick.
Mm-hmm. And leading to that, there's a whole bunch of Philip K. Dick adaptations that followed this one. You had Screamers with Peter Weller, Paycheck, which has a lot of very similar thematic stuff to this one, Minority Report, Imposter, The Adjustment Bureau, Scanner Darkly. And his films and his stories always kind of emphasize these ideas of paranoia and control. That
that technology is going to go bad somehow, or something that technology has created will harm the individual.
And this kind of idea of a conspiracy, that there's somebody out there who's actually manipulating things and controlling your existence, and you're most of the time not even aware of it.
Very Orwellian in a way, with a psychedelic twist.
There actually was a sequel planned for this movie that was going to be based on Dick's Minority Report story. And the idea, I guess, that the precogs in that story would have been mutants from this story.
I have not read these. I did not read Minority Report. I will be soon. I love that idea. I really do. And I don't know if that's reflected in his stories or if it's just something he thematically came back to.
There was a rumor, I remember, floating around for a while that Jonathan Frakes was going to direct it, because by then he was directing a lot of TV and started to branch into feature films as well. But it never really came to pass. They had a short-lived TV series produced that used a couple of the ideas from the story, but really didn't have any connections to the film. And, of course, a couple of years ago, we had the remake, directed by Len Wiseman, with Colin Farrell, Jessica Biel, and Kate Beckinsale.
Nope.
They kept promising it was going to go back to the original story, which, as you said, would have meant the entire movie takes place in one room. But they really didn't. Slight spoilers here to get into that one, so if you really do feel the need to see the remake, you may want to skip over this little portion. But the big problem with that one is, despite promising it was going to be different, it is pretty much the same story. They just take out Mars and they take out the mutants and the whole psychic subplot, which makes the whole Hauser-Quaid deception kind of pointless. There's no reason for it in that story. Instead, it becomes more about a automated robot police force or army subplot. It's a real mess.
That doesn't surprise me.
And it's a pity, because this movie's well known enough. I think you could have taken people's knowledge of the original movie and used it against them in neat ways and come up with new twists, but it really doesn't work. The only thing it's got going for it is Kate Beckinsale, who kind of plays both the Laurie and Richter parts squeezed into one, and she's actually a lot of fun. But otherwise, it's pretty much a mess. Okay, so what's your favorite scene from the movie?
My favorite scene from the movie is the fight between Laurie and Melina. They just, you know that those two actresses are fighting each other, and they're not catfighting, they're not pulling hair, there are no claws, there's some moves. There's kicking and punching and throwing, and they are just going at each other in a way we don't see too often in cinema with two females.
It's a kind of a fight between equals, these two really formidable opponents who are fighting each other in a very, not just a slugfest, but they're thinking about doing counters.
Yes, they're strategic.
They're trying to outwit each other even as they're throwing punches and kicks. I only kind of wish Melina had been the one to end it rather than Quaid, but for me, it's a tough one because there's a lot of good scenes in this one. I think my favorite is actually the big cliffhanger where they're being strapped into the chairs to have their memories erased, and Quaid is going to have his memory erased and turned back into Hauser once they find out what's going on, and Lena's going to have her identity wiped out and basically turned into his sex slave.
Right.
Ready to go, sir.
Relax, Quaid. You'll like being Hauser.
Guy's a fucking asshole.
Not true. He's one of my best friends. Besides, he's got a big house and a Mercedes. And you like Melina, right?
Well, you get to fuck her every night. That's right. She's gonna be Hauser's babe.
I'll bust his balls.
Princess. We're having you fixed. You're gonna be respectful, compliant, and appreciative. The way a woman should be.
Just the idea of that, I mean, getting killed is one thing, but to actually have your whole identity, everything you are, just gone, just wiped out, is a really scary idea.
Well, it's a horrific idea, and it would be horrifying the moment before it happened, but not after it happened. And I, of course, am not endorsing this. Please don't go out and change people. But you wouldn't know.
Well, that to me is part of the thing that makes it even more horrific. Since it is the same brain, it's just going to have different memories. I wonder, is it the same consciousness on some level or not? Like
that's a completely different conversation.
Well, like Hauser kind of jokes in his video, like maybe we'll see each other in our dreams. This idea that maybe there would be this tiny little part of Quaid still in there that gets to watch as this dominant persona runs around doing horrible things.
That would be abysmal. That would be pretty much the worst punishment.
My only disappointment is that they end this great cliffhanger not with Quaid doing anything smart to get out of it, but basically just brute strength. He just pulls his arm out of the chair and starts smacking people around with the big spike. But I do love that moment. That's always gives me chills, that scene. How about recommendations?
I would recommend Minority Report, of course, which we've already talked about. But I think out of the Philip K. adaptations, it explores the idea of new technology being used against humanity or individual humans. Things go awry when we try to control certain areas of life. And I don't know how many people have seen this movie, but you really need to. It's called Repo Men, not Repo Man with Emilio Estevez. This is Repo Men, M-E-N. And it explores a lot of the same ideas. What is real? What is not? You go through the movie thinking one thing, changing your mind, and then when it's over, you think, oh, wait a minute, I was wrong. Because there was a moment in that film, and I'm not going to spoil it, but there was a moment in that film that I was like, oh, it figures that would happen, or it's obvious, it's right there. And I was totally wrong, and that very rarely happens.
My first one would be kind of playing on the themes of memory, Dark City.
Yes.
Which touches on the idea of discovering the person you are isn't real, that it is fabrication, but also that idea that you're not defined by what you remember, but how you act. And this very Philip K. Dick idea of this paranoid conspiracy around you, that there are other people around manipulating reality for their own ends.
It's a really great recommendation.
And going to Philip K. Dick stories, I'd recommend Adjustment Bureau, because that's one of his movies that it didn't really get a big reception when it came out, which I thought was a shame. It has Matt Damon and Emily Blunt as these two people who keep trying to have this romance but find themselves hindered by these mysterious guys who, it turns out, have been manipulating all of reality for this predetermined course. We never find out exactly what it is, and about their efforts to break out of it. It's a really creepy little movie. And the third one, since we never really got to see David Cronenberg's version of this story, the closest we'd come, I'd say, is his movie Existence with Jude Law and Jennifer Jason Leigh. Again, a movie that plays with reality, where it involves a video game that's so realistic, extremists want to destroy it because it's a threat to reality. It's another one that keeps you guessing about, okay, is this real? What level are we on? What does all this mean? And keeps that uncertainty going pretty much throughout the entire story. All right, anything else you want to say about Total Recall?
Recall, recall, recall.
I love how his coworker does not get the jingle right at all.
Recall.
I wonder if they filmed that before they actually had the song ready.
Oh, I don't care which way they did it. It's
Recall,
wonderful.
Yeah. All right, that ends our conversation, but not the discussion. If you'd like to have your say about Total Recall or feel that we missed something, check out the comments section of this episode on cinemaspection.blogspot.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to cinemaspection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page, and if you're on iTunes and like what you hear, please subscribe to us, and if you have a moment to spare, please leave us a review. We appreciate any feedback you can offer. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than just what's on the screen. Thank you for listening.